Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Em and today we are going to do my January wrap-up for what I read in January. All right, so if you watched my 2023 goals video, then you will know that one of my goals for 2023 is to read less and to read a little bit slower and be a little bit more intentional with how I pick up books. I don't know that I did a great job of that in January. I still need to really sit down and kind of figure out the logistics of how that is going to work. I will say when I was looking at my January books overall, while I remember being pretty excited about most of them in the moment, in general, when I look back at January, it feels like a very meh kind of reading month. So I don't love that. That's not fun, but I'm not really sure what to do about it at this point. The nice thing about January is I did take that whole month off of Instagram, and Instagram is really my only social media platform that I'm still on. I don't do Twitter. I haven't been on Facebook in years, but every once in a while I like to take a significant chunk of time away from Instagram, just so that I can do a better job of processing how I interact with the world without also processing how all the people I follow interact with the world. So January, I took the whole month off, and it was really lovely. So my reading was really only influenced by me and then BookTube, because I still watched YouTube in January. Anyways, this is a really long intro to this, so let's talk about what I read in January. So one of my goals was to cut how many books I read a month in half. I generally read between like 17 and 23 books a month, but I wanted to try to work in doing some other hobbies. I wanted to watch a little bit more TV. I didn't do a very good job of that, so that is something to continue to work on. I just wanted to make more room in my life for other things that aren't books, because while books are great, I want other things in there as well. So I didn't quite cut it in half. I read 13. I was aiming for 10, but 13 I think is perfectly reasonable as I'm adjusting it down. I will say I did not read as many of my own books this month as I would have liked to have read. I'm gonna do this pretty quick because in doing my weekly wrap-up videos, I've talked about pretty much all of these books in some capacity, and I don't want to belabor it too much. So the first book I finished of the year was The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin. This is book 2 in her Great Cities duology. And I think I gave this one like 4.25 stars. I think on Cawpile it came out to like a 4, but I used Storygraph, and Storygraph lets you do quarter stars, so I bumped it up because I love the characters so much. I'm not going to do a synopsis because this is a sequel and a conclusion, and so there's lots of spoilers, but I felt like this was fine overall. Really the reason it has such a high rating is because I love the characters and I loved what Jemisin did with the characters. But this is also a very short book for a Jemisin book, and I felt like it could have been longer. I would have loved for it to have been longer. So there's that. And this was a library book. The next book I finished was Graceline, and this was for a series read-along with Stephanie Bookish's Patreon. I'm going to assume if you watch me, you also watch Stephanie, because I don't know how you would have found my videos and not also know about the existence of Stephanie, but I'll link her channel down below. She is fantastic. I like her so much. Highly, highly recommend. Anyways, so we're doing a series read-along for Graceline by Kristen Cashore, and this is kind of an older YA fantasy book. And I gave this 3.5 stars. There are parts of it I really like. There are parts of it I kind of struggled with. I did keep wishing that this series had existed when I was in high school, because I feel like teenage Em would have loved this so much. It reminded me a lot of Tamora Pierce, and I can see, because it's a 2007 book, I could see a lot of the tropes and attributes that YA fantasy heroines had in like the early to mid-teens. I could see a lot of those origins in Katza and Graceling. And I am going to be continuing on with the series for the Patreon read-along. I'm really excited. And Graceling I got from the library as well. I had a physical copy. I also listened to the audiobook on Hoopla, and the audiobook is from Bruce Colville's audiobook company, which means it's full cast, and there's music, and it was a really fun experience to listen to it on audio. I would recommend it on audio. I thought it was pretty great, especially for being an older audiobook. And then the next book I read was Heretic Royal by G.A. Aiken. This is book 3 in the Broken Earth. No, I think it's the Broken Earth saga. And this is not a jumping in point if you have not read these books. I think in general, when G.A. Aiken writes a series, it is never a series where you can just pop in whenever and be fine. You have to start at the beginning and work your way up. So Heretic Royals book 3, it very much felt like a middle book. It felt like we were moving everybody around to where we need to be for book 4. But with that being said, I did really like the characters. I mean, if you haven't figured it out right now, I am a very character-driven reader. If I love the characters, you don't need a plot. I will just read it. I will just read character interactions for a whole book. Nothing needs to happen. They can just banter with each other for 300 pages, and I'll probably give it 5 stars, because that's just how I am. And that's kind of where the Heretic Royal falls in. I think I gave it like 3.75 stars. So not like an all-time favorite. Yeah, very much felt like it had middle book syndrome, but I like the dynamic between all the characters. I actually felt like the romance was the least interesting part of this book. The best part was that you get characters from a previous series coming in, and watching the characters from that series like interact with the characters from this series was like, it was so fun. And that again was a library book, and I also listened to it on audio from Scribd. So we are 3 books in, and I had yet to read anything off my own shelf. And then the next book I read was A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsk, which was actually a reread. I really like Freya Marsk's writing. I love her characters. That is a book where the romance has me in a chokehold the whole time. I just love watching Robin and, oh no, what's his name? Edwin. I just love watching Robin and Edwin learn to trust each other, especially like Edwin is so insecure for very good reasons. And even if they weren't good reasons, it's not like you can be like rational about your insecurities. So I just love watching Edwin be so protectively closed off, and then the way he slowly opens up through the book and with Robin is just, it's so sweet. It's so sweet. So yeah, this is, I think on the reread, I gave it 4.5 stars. And actually I might have to go back and change that rating, because I did try to listen to the audiobook this time, and there was something about the narrator that I did not enjoy. I felt like his reading of certain like lines was really weird, like the inflection was in a wrong spot, or it had like an enthusiasm to it that wasn't warranted for the situation. It's not a good audiobook experience for me, and I feel like maybe in hindsight that negative audiobook experience influenced my rating. So I think I might go back and bump it up to 5 stars because I really do think it's a wonderful book and with wonderful characters, and especially for a debut, just fantastic. And then the next book was a library book. It was She Eats the Night by Marjorie Liu. It's a graphic novel. It's horror, which is not my genre. It is a little rough. I don't think I talked about this one very much, but this one is set during the pandemic. I think it's in New York. And it's brother and sister who are twins, and they're grown, and they are running a restaurant in the like city that they and their parents live in. And their parents live across the street from this house that has been for sale for a long time, but the realtor is having a really hard time selling it because a really gruesome crime happened at that house, and it is scaring prospective buyers away. And so the mother, who you get the sense is really secretive, forces her children to help her clean up the house for the realtor, who's a friend of the family. And then things just get really freaking weird and disturbing. And like, don't read this if creepy dolls freak you out, because there's a whole thing with creepy dolls. So I gave this a 4-star because it is good. I think the illustrations are really evocative. Marjorie Liu is a fantastic writer. I enjoyed 0% of my reading experience. So it's not the book for me, but if you like horror, I think you would dig this. If you like the Monstrous graphic novel series, which is also by Marjorie Liu, but wish there was more horror, I think you would like this. It just is not for me. But then I followed up She Eats the Night with Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna McGuire, which is the latest installment in her Wayward Children series. And this one was so good. I gave this one, again, 4.5 stars. This is one of my favorite things I read in January. It is absolutely heartbreaking. So in this book, we follow Ancy, who we've met in a previous book, but the book starts when she's 5 and her dad dies in front of her. And fairly quickly after that, her mother remarries, and the new husband is not a good person. And Ancy gets the sense pretty quickly that she is not safe around him, though she can't really articulate why. There is a trigger warning in the beginning from the author that there is grooming and the threat of assault in this book, though Ancy leaves before anything can happen. And then the world that Ancy ends up finding is where lost things go to be found. And it was so interesting to be in like this in-between world in this book. And I, again, love her imagination and just the way she structures all of the books in the series. But yeah, this was just fantastic, but definitely one of the saddest books in the series. Also, if you haven't read any Wayward Children and you want to jump in, I think this is a good one to jump into. I think this one is isolated enough from the rest of the series that you could pick it up and you wouldn't feel lost, because you don't really reference anybody from earlier books. So there's that. And then that was off of my unread shelf, though I did read it right after it came out. So I also read Inferior by Angela Ciani. I should have looked that up beforehand. But this is nonfiction, is about assumed difference between men and women's brains. male scientists would like to prove that there is a difference, but the actuality is there is no difference. So I thought this was really easy to read, really easy to consume. It's very compelling. It's very validating. And I would read more by this author because I like found myself picking this up instead of my fiction book at the time, which this is not usually how it goes with me in nonfiction. Usually I have to remind myself to continue to read my nonfiction book instead of compulsively picking it up. And that was a library book as well. The next book was one I owned. I had an audiobook of this from, I think, the year it came out, but I listened to A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And at the time, I gave it 3.75 stars. I feel like I'm being a little nitpicky with these quarter star ratings. But, you know, and at the time I was like, meh, it's fine. But I have thought about this book fairly frequently since I finished it. So I might have to go back and bump it up a little bit. Because, well, at the time I think at the time I was being a little cranky about YA fantasy and it's dark academia. But I think the narrator's voice is really clear, really distinct. I like that she's rude and she's mean, and largely she doesn't apologize for it. And she's rude and she's mean, but she still helps people. She still cares. She's like still a good person. She just has like all those spikes up to protect herself because of past life events. So I really liked it. I really liked the narrator. I think I'm gonna go back and bump it up like to a 4 or 4.25 because I do keep thinking about it and how just unique that school setting is. I can't think of another YA book that has a similar setup. And then I finally read a book off of my unread shelf. I read A Restless Truth by Freya Marsk, which is book 2 in the series that A Marvelous Light is the beginning of. This is a sapphic romance between Maud, who is the younger sister of Robin from the first book. There's not a whole lot I can say about this book because a lot of the plot from A Marvelous Light is left unresolved, carries over into this book. However, this book takes place on a ship, which I did not love. It made it feel a little stagnant in certain parts because you just don't have a whole lot of places to go. But I think the cast of characters is really fun. The couple for book 3 is introduced in this one. I mean, we already know one of them from the first book, but the other person gets introduced, and like the minute those two characters started sniping at each other, I thought, if these two are not the couple in the third book, I'm gonna lose my mind. I just can't, I wouldn't have been able to handle it. So excited. Like, finally a synopsis is out for book 3, and I cannot wait. It's gonna be so good. Okay, anyways, so Restless Truth. So I can't say very much about the plot, but I did like the characters. I don't know, I liked it, but not as much as The Marvelous Light, and probably not as much as I'm going to love the last book in the series. So there's that. But it was on my unread shelf, and I finished it. So that's good. It's not staring at me anymore, judging me for not picking it up and reading it. And then after that, I read what is sadly the most disappointing read of the month for me. This is A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross. This is also a HarperCollins title, and the HarperCollins union is still on strike at like 60 something days because HarperCollins leadership refuses to negotiate with the union. So if you want more information about that, I will link the HarperCollins Union's Instagram below. Also, Just Owens has a really great video about the strike from, I think, December. So if you want more information, I will link that below and you can check it out. But I'm going to be trying really hard to pay attention to who the publishers are for books and not contribute to marketing for them. But I will say this was my most disappointing read of the month. I did not love this. But this was also a library read, so at least I was not out any money on a book I did not like, which is always good. Okay, so the next 3 books I talked about in my last weekly wrap-up video, and I talked about all of them pretty in depth, so I'm just going to briefly mention The Terraformers. I read as an ARC. It is now out, so you can get it from your library or buy it from your favorite indie bookstore if you want to read it as well. I gave it 4 stars, and my husband's reading it right now, which I love. I can't wait to talk to him about it as he gets further along. The last 2 books of the month were Sorcery of Thorns, which was a 5-star reread. And then the last book of the month was Mysteries of Thorn Manor, which I gave 4.5 stars. So that's all the books I read. In total, that was 13 books. Not very many that I own. Let's see, 1, 2, 6 out of the 13 I owned, but 2 of them were rereads, and 2 of them I purchased in the month of January as well. So not great in terms of like working through my unread shelf. Like I said, the worst book of the month for me was River Enchanted. Best book, I think, was Sorcery of Thorns. I really loved that. I did not read as many books by authors of color as I would have liked to. Only 25% of the books I read were by an author of color. I generally like to have that closer to 50%. I was not very intentional about making sure I was putting books by authors of color on my TBR, so I need to be more cognizant of that moving forward. I also like to have the books I read either by queer authors or featuring queer characters. I like to have that around 40%, and I did pretty good in January. About 56.3% of the books I read either featured an LGBTQIA+ character, or the author is somewhere in that spectrum. So happy with that, but I gotta work on the authors of color for February. 69% of what I read was a physical book, 15% was a digital book, and 15% was also an audiobook. For DNFs, I DNF'd 4 books in January. I DNF'd The Hidden Blade by Sherry Thomas, Dangerous Men and Adventurous Women, edited by Jane Ann Krentz. I also DNF'd The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson for the 2nd time. So that is an official DNF. I am not gonna go back and try to read that book again because this was my 2nd attempt. And then the 4th book I DNF'd was called Wild New World by Dan, I think, Flores, which is nonfiction. So, yeah, not horrible. I'm 4 DNFs, that's fine. Right, so that is my January wrap up. I don't know if this was useful or interesting. I feel like I've been talking for a very long time, so if you have made it through this whole video, thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of it, maybe some new books to pick up, maybe some books to avoid, I don't know, but I really appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a good rest of wherever you are in your day, wherever you are in your week, wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.